Hi, this is Robin, and in this video today I'm going to be talking about how to use color grading to add mood to your photos. And specifically, I'm going to be demonstrating how to use the Photoshop Camera Raw filter. But before we get into color grading, I thought again maybe I better do some defining of what I mean by that. So color grading is different than color correction, but they do work together. So color correction fixes colors that are off in your images or are sometimes incorrect in your photos, whereas color grading is done purposefully to try to change the colors that are in the image for aesthetic reasons. And I just want to say on the topic of changing things for aesthetic reasons. So again, the focus of my channel is on fine art photography and targeted to fine art photographers. So I have absolutely no qualms whatsoever about altering elements in my photos to create impact, and that includes color. So that's why I'm addressing something like this and how to do this kind of a process. So, as I said, color correction is a way to adjust factors in your image like the exposure or the white balance for you to fix contrast or reduce noise in your image. It can also reduce highlights or perhaps open up blocked shadows. So those are the kind of things I would use color correction on. And I would do them first before I would do the color grading. The color grading, on the other hand, is something where you'd work with a color wheel and you're trying to look at different themes and relationships between colors. You're working with curves, you're working with masks, you're working with luminance. So, in other words, the brightness or the darkness of the tones in the colors. You're working with the saturation and the balance of colors in your image to try to not only enhance your base image, but to build a story or some kind of psychological or emotional impact on your viewers. So the goal with color grading is definitely, I think, to evoke emotion and to make your images much more compelling than they might be out of the camera. That doesn't mean you have to go nuts with the color grading, but you can go as far as you think that you want to go to achieve the effect that you want to achieve, is my attitude. Now, color grading is something that actually has its roots in cinema. So if you've seen movies, well, then you've seen color grading because every scene in a movie has been color graded by a professional colorist. And I don't claim to be a professional colorist, but I have studied art most of my life, and I do have some basic understanding of different colors and the principles of and the psychology of colors. But I think that the principles that are used in color grading, even if they started out in the movies, are equally relevant to still photography. So that's why I think it's useful as something to have a tutorial and this workshop and some demos on color grading for photography too. In this video, what I'm going to do is briefly review the symbolism associated with different colors in case you haven't had art classes or it's something that maybe is a little rusty to you. And then I want to demonstrate how to use the color grading panel in Photoshop's Camera Raw filter. That panel used to be called split toning, but I think for the past couple of generations or releases of Photoshop, they've called it the Camera Raw filter color grading panel. So that's where you can look for it, is where it says color grading. Now, there are other color grading tools in Photoshop too, and I'm going to demonstrate them in some other videos at another time, but specifically like the gradient map and lookup tables, which are also used a lot in movies. They're referred to as LUTs, L-U-T-S. But for this particular video, I am just going to focus on and demonstrate the color grading panel. So what I wanted to do here is to show you how you can use color to enhance mood or the storytelling qualities of your photos. So when we're going through color and talking about color psychology, I think it's a good idea to at least have a basic idea of what different colors represent. I'm certainly not in this video going to be able to make you a master colorist, but I think it helps to just at least think of the color basics when you're doing color grading to your photos. So I grabbed this stock photo as something to work with, and what I've done is I've overlaid a single color on it on multiple layers using both warm colors and cool colors. And what I thought I would do is explain what different warm or cool colors represent symbolically. Now, something to just keep in mind, and it's my disclaimer, is that in different cultures, colors can definitely have different meanings or associations. I'm from the United States, and so my frame of reference for what the colors represent is from where I've grown up and what I live with and have learned about. So if you're from a different culture, these color meanings may be different for you. So you would just have to keep that in mind when you're trying to convey something and know who your target audience is and how they might understand the colors that you're using. So to start with, I want to show you how it looks if we overlay just a solid warm color onto this basic stock image that I grabbed. Now, warm colors in general suggest energy, more extroversion, freedom, positivity, all the kind of positive things in life are the warm colors. A warm day, you think of that, and what do you think of? You think of nice, happy things. So, warm colors in an image, in art, and in photography tend to come forward towards the user. They stand out. So you can see, doesn't your eyes sort of go to the yellow in her shirt versus the rest of this cool image? So warm colors come forward in a scene and get attention. All right, so let's see how this same image looks if I overlay a pure red tint over it. So here's the red, which is a very intense warm color, okay? And red, when you think about psychology or emotion or how it affects people, it can represent passion, it can represent anger, it can represent excitement. So you just have to think for the image that you are working with versus this particular image here, how might red add to that image or add to a mood or a feeling that you want to convey? Now, if we move on to orange, which is also a warm color, it's much softer than red. So again, it's got the feeling of enthusiasm and joy or fun and feeling uplifted, but it's not as intense as that red. So where might orange make more sense than red in your image if you're color grading is something to think about. Same thing with yellow. So yellow is again a very vibrant warm color. It represents spontaneity, it represents hope, it represents sunshine. So just think about that and where you might use, and you can see how this is, each of these successive colors is just sort of changing the mood of the image. And that's the goal of this video, is to say, how can you use color to add impact or add emotion or storytelling features to your images. Okay, so those are the warm colors. So now let me move on to the main cool colors. And there's all secondary and tertiary colors. I'm not going to get into all of them because they're just subtle variants on these. I'm just going to stick with kind of the pure warms and cools. Now, the cool colors, which is I have up here, tend to be more moody. They sort of imply stillness or introspection or wonder, but they can also be concern and fear. So you have to think about how is a cool color going to affect your mood. If you're doing a winter scene, well, you're not going to have a lot of yellows and reds and oranges. You're going to go for cool colors. So let's look at green and see what green does to this scene. Green as a color tends to show calm and being peaceful or feeling inspired, things of that nature. Usually if you're thinking of meditation or things when they want you to relax, they're showing you something green, or packaging of something that's supposed to calm you down will have green in it. when you move on to blue as a color, see how much more intense that is? It often represents sadness or depression, but it could also be relaxation and tranquility. So you think of a yoga scene and, maybe not as intense a blue as this, but you might want to feel very relaxed and blue with a yoga scene. So, think about where you're going to use it. But again, keep in mind, look at this blue even overlaid on this image. The yellow is popping forward and the cool colors, the blue and the green, recede. So how can you make things in your scene recede or come forward depending on the colors that you use? And then finally, the last of the cool colors I was going to show you an overlay with is purple. Purple suggests richness. It's a royal color. The royalty in different places wear purple. That's what sets them apart as royalty and being wealthy. But purple can also represent mystery. It can represent creativity. And one thing that I love, because I love this kind of art, is surreal sort of things can come with purple too. So, think about ways you might want to use purple. And it doesn't always have to be in the dark parts of your image. Look what it's doing up in the light parts. It's just giving kind of a fantasy feel to this image too. So think about how you might want to use that purple color in yours, whether you're doing any of these as a single color overlay or whether you're going to mix and match different colors into your scene. Now, I don't have overlays here, but we can't forget that there are neutrals too. So black is a neutral, and if you use more black in your scene and darkness in your scene, it tends to convey formality, but it can also be used obviously to represent death or evil. So you want to think about how black could be used as a neutral to enhance any colors you might have in the scene. Full colors. And then the other neutral, white, represents the opposite of black, so that represents innocence and light and softness and things that are uplifting. So, where do you want more brightness and white and lightness? So, I think it's just good, as I said, to have the basics of color impacts in your mind when you're doing color grading and when you're processing and trying to make an impact with your images. Now, when you're color grading, you can mix these warms and cools together, and what it will do is it can add contrast, both physical kind of visual contrast, but also emotional contrast and interest into your scene. So, you just have to pay attention to where you want to draw the attention and what you want your user to feel when they're looking at your image. Now, if you want them to feel what you felt when you prepared the image, you might process it differently than if you want to influence them to feel a way different than how you felt. So just things to think about. Okay, so that is my overview of the basic overview of the colors and color psychology and impacts of color broadly on an image. The other thing I wanted to show you just quickly here is, as I mentioned, color grading came from the movies, came from cinema. So places of inspiration for you if you want to think about how to do color grading or what colors you might want to color grade with is look at what the movies have done. Look at movie stills online and see how have the professional colorists used colors in their movies that they color graded to make you feel certain things at different points in the movie. So some suggestions I can offer you for inspiration of where to check out movie stills online and get a feeling for color grading in those movie stills is, and I'm going to, by the way, put these into the description under the video so that if it's not clear what I'm saying, you'll have them for reference there. So just look in the description for some of these websites to check out. So the first one I wanted to mention is called FilmGrab, and it's all one word. The next one is Movie-Screencaps, so it's like short for screen captures, so Movie-Screencaps. The next one is Shot.Cafe, Film.AI, and it's actually written as Film.AI. And then the final one is a website called Art of the Movies, and it's a website that has a lot of movie posters on it. So you can look at these different, and if you have a favorite movie that you want to get a look of yours to look like, then you might want to look for a specific movie, or else you can just browse these things. They're just really kind of great to get inspiration. Now, let's say you do find a movie and you say, oh, I want my image that I'm working on to have that kind of color grading to it. Well, I've made this as just kind of an example of what you can do. So here's a snip, a screen capture from one of those pages of one of those movie stills, and I said, gee, this looks kind of bright and light, nice and kind of romantic. What are the colors that this colorist has used here? And so what I did was I imported a JPEG snip, so it has to be a JPEG, don't use a TIFF, into Adobe Color. And there's the URL right up there, and I'll put this in the description under my video also, so that you can have the information of where to find this. And what you can do is you can upload an image such as this, and it could be your own images too. It doesn't have to just be from movie stills. So anything you want to use as a reference image. And what you can do is once it's in there, you can extract a theme, which is what this is. So it has created, by picking the predominant colors in this shot, this still, it has generated for me a palette of colors that I can use as reference to say, oh, when I go to color grade, this can be my darkest color, this could be my mid-tone color, and perhaps one of these could be my highlight color. So it just becomes kind of a reference for you to use of how to set your palette to use for your own color grading. Okay, so that's another tool to be aware of on the web that you can go to that Adobe provides. Now, if you like this and think you might want to use something like this palette another time, there is a way on the actual web page to say, save this to my libraries, and you can save it and you can name it. And then when you come into Photoshop, which is what my whole interface is here, and you go to your Libraries tab, if yours isn't open, you can go to Window and then Libraries to click it to be open, and then that's where the palette that you save will show up, is in your library. Okay, so let's just get into the demo here, so I can show you how to use some of these principles that I've been talking about, and we can show you how to use the color grading feature in the Camera Raw filter. Okay, so in this first demo image I have here, let me just quickly make a duplicate. I always make a duplicate of what I'm working on so that we don't do any damage to the original photo. Okay, so we have a girl. She's walking through an alley, and I don't know, to me it just looks like a nice scene. It looks like a kid who's kind of coming home from school, and she's calling her mother and saying, yeah, I'm on the way, or she's calling her friends and they're going to meet at the pizza place, whatever, over here, when she gets down to the other end of the alley. And it's a bright sunny day. It's kind of nice. There's kind of fun graffiti. I've actually been to streets like this where I go to check out the graffiti and see what type of artistic work they've done, but it's kind of a just nice, pleasant scene. But what I want to do is use color grading here in Photoshop using the color grading panel in the Camera Raw filter, and I want to turn this into maybe a more eerie, I'm trying to decide whether I want to say dusk or night scene. So it's going to be the blue hour is what I want to try to make this be, so that it feels a little bit more ominous. And, well, is there something lurking behind, one of these garbage bins, or is she calling 911? So I just want to change it from this kind of pleasant, upbeat look to using color grading to make it a completely different type of look. So what I'm going to do here, after I have duplicated my layer, is go up to the filter menu in Photoshop and come down to where it says Camera Raw filter right there. Okay, it's in like the third or fourth section. So just click on that, and that's launched us now. So now we are in the Camera Raw filter. We're outside of the regular Photoshop interface. And what I'm going to do before I do the color grading is what I talked about when I gave you the definitions right up front in this video. We're going to start with color correction. We want to get this to a good base image that will provide a way for me to do some color grading on top of the color correction. So I want to get this image to a place where it will be easy to do the color grading to it. So I'm going to start in my basic panel in the Camera Raw filter. And the first step I'm going to do typically if I want to prepare an image for color grading by doing color correction is to work on contrast. So for this image, because it's kind of bright and light and there's nice contrast, is I want to reduce the contrast somewhat. So I want to make it a little, because it gets a little mistier and foggier. And let's see here, how much do I want to go? And a little bit more, less definite to see things. There, that's kind of good. That feels more like we're, oh, did it come back to 0? Here we go. Well, there we go. All right, let's leave that there. All right, so things get a little bit more less definite looking and a little less defined looking when we're into that blue hour. Okay, so definitely where the shadows are, I want this to be darker, to be a nighttime type of scene. So next, I'm going to adjust the shadows. So shadows and highlights would be my recommendation. So first do contrast, and then I would say then adjust the shadows and highlights. So let me get the shadows darker and watch the image versus where I'm pulling the slider and see where how the image is changing. Yeah, so we're getting, all right, so I'm going to take the shadows all the way down to a -100 just to get her clothes darker, get the shadows in here darker, make it look a little bit eerier where the shadows are. Okay, so next I'm going to adjust the highlights. And again, everything's a little too bright now for a nighttime scene, so I'm going to go to the left to take down the highlights. And again, watch her. I'm watching her face. I'm watching the light on the dumpsters. I'm watching the ground. I want to leave a little bit, let me see. Yeah, I want to leave a little bit of light on her face in here. It's almost the Da Vinci lighting, or Rembrandt, sorry. I've got Da Vinci on the brain because I've been doing video things. Rembrandt lighting, so there's light on one side of her face and a little bit of a triangle on the other for the Rembrandt lighting, so I want to keep that highlight there and not lose that by reducing that too much. Okay, the next thing I would do in color correction before I get into color grading is do stuff with the saturation typically. So the saturation slider is down here in the Camera Raw filter, so I'm going to take my, and especially since I'm going from a bright daylight buoyant kind of an image to a darker one that's moodier, I want to reduce my saturation. I want things a little less color saturated when I'm going for a moody evening. Yeah, there we go, because it's sort of muddied it up a little bit, which is a good thing for me in this particular case. Yeah, do a little bit of vibrance hit too. Okay, so with those color corrections made in the basic panel, now I'm going to slide down a little lower to one of the other panels here, and we come down to where it says color grading. Okay, and this is what it used to be called split toning, and all they let you do when all Photoshop had was split toning was shadows and highlights. So now we have the ability to work with shadows, midtones, and highlights. And there's different ways you can work in this panel, so let me just do a quick little overview here. So, and these are the different things you can adjust. So in this mode, you can see at the same time what's happening to the colors in the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, and you can reduce how much it's being applied by these little sliders underneath. And what you could do is either pull the center circles around like this, see, to change the color. You watch the image, you can see what I'm doing. So if I move the center circle around, you can see the colors are changing in the image itself. Okay. Or I can grab this little circle on the outside and pull this around. Okay, and move that around that way too. And if we go in and out, the saturation increases and decreases. Okay, and so that's one way to work with that, but I don't personally prefer to work with these three different color wheels all at the same time because they're kind of small, and if you want to get to subtleties of color, I like to work with them individually. But let me tell you what else is down here before we move on. So then there's a blending slider, and what the blending means is, so when you have put colors into your scene, so let's say you put a blue in the shadows, a green in the midtones, and a red in the highlights. This blending slider will tell you whether those are all going to be distinct lines of blue, green, red, and you'll see very definite fall-offs between each of the colors and distinctive boundaries, I guess is a good word, between the colors. Or, and that's so the more left you go, the more distinctive boundaries you're going to see with the blending. The further right on that slider you go, the softer, the smoother the feathering will be. The blending between the colors will be a smoother blend, and there'll be less distinctive edges to the colors. So you have just to decide, okay, do you want it to be very impactful and very strict, sharp cutoffs between colors, or do you want somebody's eyes to just sort of blend between them and not really know distinctively where they separate, in which case then you would pull it to the right for blending. Okay. Right? And balance, this goes back to the days of the split toning. So if you pull the balance slider to the left, then the colors that you have set for the shadows will be the more predominant, will get more emphasis in your image. If you pull your balance slider to the right, the colors that you've set for the highlights or the lighter midtones will be, the look of the image will be skewed more towards the highlight and the lighter midtone colors if you put this to the far right. Okay. All right, so I'm going to reset those for now. But I personally prefer not to work with the three color wheels altogether. I like to go to the next section of this interface where we have each of the color wheels is separate. So here we have a color wheel for the shadows right there. The next one over is a color wheel for the midtones. And the next one over is the color wheel for the highlights. And I like working with these because you can see this is a bigger color wheel. It's easier to work with, but it works in the same way as other ones. You can either pull this center circle or you can pull around the outside. Personally, I prefer to either click on this center circle and drag it around, or I like to go to the hue slider and just drag it to the color that I want. And hue is just another word for color. So you can move it either way by pulling through the different colors or by dragging the hue slider. And let me see if I can remember this here. So I think using your depressing, so pressing and holding your Alt or your Option key, depending on whether you're on a PC or a Mac, lets you move in a lot finer. So if you're getting to want to get to a specific color, and this is just moving too much without holding it, that lets you do more granular color changes. It's holding the Alt or the Option. And if I do the Control, let's see, on a Mac, I guess it would be Command, then what this does is it lets you work around the different colors. So it just, but you have to keep holding down the Control or the Command, and then you can just stay at a certain level of hue. Okay, and you can just choose different hues. If you do the Shift key and depress it, then what that does is you can slide in and out for different levels of saturation for a given color. So if you have picked cyans, then you hold the shift key, then you can get more or less saturated sliding along that line for that hue that you like. So that's some quick shortcuts if you want to try to work with those tools. So let's try color grading this image now so that we can try to make her look like she's in a dark alley after dusk. So I'm going to start with my shadows. So I've got my shadows color wheel active. And what I'm going to do is start with the hue. So, when we talk about evening, blue hour, so I'm going to move the colors that are here more towards the blues than where they are now. So I'm going to just drag this because I said I tend to like to work here, but we can do it the other way too if it's easier for you. And watch, so you can see, first of all, I'm just sliding along this hue and looking at the image as I do it to see where I'm just coloring to taste, as it were. So I kind of like that in that range there. It's blue. Yeah, that's, like it's a little muddy. I'm going to come back just. I'm going to stay there. Okay, so I've got my hue for my shadows set at this 234 blue here. Okay, next I'm going to set the saturation. So again, because I want more blue in this scene to make it a night scene, I'm going to increase the saturation. So again, you can watch I'm dragging the saturation slider. And so you would do that too if you want to add more saturation, and just you can watch the image, and as I'm doing this you can see into the shadows. Look at her clothes and these shadows. You're seeing more blue is being added to give it a more nighttimey kind of an effect. Let's see here. Oh, that's kind of good because her clothes just kind of got to a really nice level of blue that I like there. All right, I'm going to stay right there. Okay, so I've gotten some nice blue infused into the shadows of this scene to make it look more nighttimey. And then the final slider that I'm going to work with for the shadow and for this blue color is the luminance. So again, the luminance is telling me how bright or how dark. It's the tonality of that color that I've selected. So since I selected a blue, and I want it to be a dark blue, I'm going to pull to the left. If you wanted a light version of the color you picked, you would pull it to the right. See where it's lighter here and darker here? So I'm going to pull the luminance to the left and try to make the blue even darker. Just trying to get that nighttime look. Oh yeah, somewhere in here is good. Alright, I'm going to leave it there. Might be a little dark. Yeah, let me stay there. Okay. All right, so that's good. I'm good here for the shadows. So I'm going to leave the shadows color wheel and move on to the next one, which is the midtone. So I'm just clicking on it, left clicking, and it activates the midtones color wheel. All right, so for the midtones, I also, because again, I want to put more blue in there because some of her skin tones and some of these colors here, I want to drive them more blue to go with the theme that I'm going for. Okay, so I'm over here too far, so I'm gonna come back towards the blues, and I'm gonna get it somewhere. Let's see here, where do I want this? I want to add a little bit of light to her face. Here, I'm going to leave her there. Okay, so that's for the midtones. I've got the hue in this bluish range. Next, I'm going to do the saturation for the midtones. Midterms, I guess I feel like I'm at school. Saturation. Okay, so let's see here. Where do I want to go with the saturation? Maybe a moderate amount of saturation for her. Yeah, see, we're getting her more blue now. This is good. Good, good, good. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, this is looking more like she's in a dark, creepy alley to me. Let's just keep going and see how much is too much. Then I'll back it off. Yeah, I want to come back a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to keep it around there. All right, and then finally the luminance. So again, I think I can go darker for the midtones too, because some of these areas still could be a little darker to suit my taste for this, for what I'm trying to achieve here. So I'm coming down to my luminance slider over here on this midtones associated color wheel, and I'm pulling it to the left to go darker. Yeah, here we go. We're getting the, look at the street is getting darker, and some of the light hitting the dumpsters is getting darker. I want to keep a little light on her face. I'm going to stay in there. Okay. All right. And then the final thing that we're going to work on here is the highlights. So we're clicking on our third color grading color wheel to activate for the highlights and work on the highlights. And in this one, as I said before when I was talking about blending warms and cools and how it can add some contrast or just a creepy kind of feel to things, I want to add a little bit of yellow because yellow is the opposite of blue. So there's some natural contrast and fighting each other just to have the yellow and the blue and some pop when you put a contrasting color from the color wheel together. So here's blue and here's yellow. They're opposite each other on the color wheel. So I want to add some yellow just for some contrast and for a sort of a jarring effect here. So with my highlights color wheel active, I want to come to the yellows. And where are we? I'm watching the image. Oh, yeah, we're getting some good yellow in her, creepy yellow in her face. Whoever thought creepy is a good thing? Well, of course, it's just around Halloween when I'm recording this, so I guess I've got that on my mind. Little hint more of the... too much. All right, maybe I will leave it there. All right. For saturation for the yellow, I want to bring it up because I do want it to be a little bit more, stand out a little bit more, and I want the light, as I said before, the warm colors attract attention. So I want people to look at her face and see that she has a concerned expression on her face. Now all of a sudden it's changed from just chatting with a friend to concerned, given the color symbolism. And so people would look at her face, then study the rest of the scene, and then come back to her again and just keep circling around the image, which is what you want them to do. Okay, yeah, all right. So we're getting enough brightness where I'm getting the Rembrandt lighting on the right side of her face and then the little bit of that Rembrandt triangle on her left cheek. I don't know. That maybe is too much. No, I don't like that. So let's reverse this. So for the saturation for the highlights, I'm going to take it up. Maybe I grabbed the wrong thing when I was looking over at the image. I thought something looks strange to me here. Okay, yeah, I moved my highlights, my saturation slider, so there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, let's do that. And then the luminance, I actually want to take it down now that I've got that. I moved my slider. Okay, that's too much. Too much, too much, too much. Just a hint of darkness to this. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so now I've got my shadows, my midtones, and my highlights color graded by adjusting the hue, which is the color, the intensity of the color, which is the saturation, and the luminance, which is the tonality, the brightness or the darkness of the color. So now we want to use these last two sliders in the color grading panel. So for blending, because I remember I said that tells you how distinctive the colors are going to be between shadow, midtone, and highlight. And I would like mine slightly blended or slightly softer or slightly feathered. I don't want the cutoffs to be too distinct. So I'm going to pull this blending slider a little bit to the right just to soften the transitions between the colors. Alright, so I'm leaving blending there. That looks good to me. So there's no kind of distinct lines between the colors. And then balance, as I said, says whether you're going to skew the color grading to the shadows and the low and the darker midtones, or if you're going to skew it towards the lighter, brighter midtones and the highlights. And I think again, because I want this to be a dark scene, am going to skew it towards the shadows. I go a little bit. There, that's good. Yeah, maybe a little bit much. Alright, let me leave it there. Okay, and then the final circle that we see over here under Adjust, under Color Grading, so we've done our 3 shadows, midtones, and highlights. We got them all color graded and got all the settings and gotten the balance and the blending that we want. The final circle that you can adjust here is a global color wheel. So you can adjust a color that affects the entire image. So that's what it means by global, is the entire image will be impacted and not just specifically the shadows or specifically the midtones or specifically the highlights. And you don't have to add a global setting, and you don't even have to adjust all of those, but I'm just showing you how it works if you work with all of them. So if we were to add a global setting to this, and it's absolutely not required, I think I would personally add a little more blue to this again too. So with my circle highlighted active here for global, it activated the global color wheel. I'm going to move this more towards the blues again, just to make the blues even more pronounced. I can't chew and move sliders at the same time. So let me see here. Just look back and forth between the image and the slider. Yeah, I like that, or in that range basically, because she's still got that creepy yellow on her face, but so we've got the contrast between the blue and the yellow, but it's just made it a darker scene yet, so it feels like somebody should be lurking in that alley to me. I want to increase the saturation of this global blue. So whatever global color it is that you've applied, if you increase the saturation, it's going to increase it across the entire image for that color that you pick. Oh yeah, we're even getting a little purples in here too, which makes it mysterious and creepy. Like I said before, that purple is kind of a mystery color, so let me leave that there. And then the luminance, again, we're doing dark, so I want to come a little bit darker for the overall grading, but not too nuts. Let me stay right around there. Okay, so I feel pretty happy with this now, because I think that I've gotten it into a completely different mood than where this thing has started out. And while you're here in this color grading panel, see this little eye icon right over here to the right of the words color grading? If you click on that and hold it, you can see your original image and you can see your color graded image. So you can see as you're going along if you're achieving the look that you want to, and you can make adjustments accordingly. Now, one other thing I want to show you before we leave this is, let's say that you have a bunch of other images and you want to give them sort of this dark, moody night look, or whatever look it was that you did, then you want to save it so that you can apply it to other images. Why have to go through all of this every single time? I mean, at least it's a good starting point. At the very least, you can create a custom preset of this look. And what you would do to create your preset is that you go over here to the right hand side of this camera raw filter panels interface, and see this little icon right here with the two overlapping circles. If you have it set like mine does, it'll pop out and say presets. Those are presets. If you left click on that, you'll get a whole list of presets here, both the ones that Adobe provides and the ones that you may have created for yourself. So you can see I've created a lot of different presets. And so if you want to create a preset of this look to apply to other images, what you would do, and I'm not going to save mine, but I'll just show you the process so that you know what to do, is once you've launched the presets by clicking on those two little overlapping circles, you click on this little icon that looks like a little piece of paper with the corner folded back right there, and it'll pop out this box right here that says Create Preset. And you can name your preset. So in my case, I might call it Dark Night, or, you know, whatever, Moody Night or something like that, or Blue Hour, anything. You know, name yours whatever's appropriate for what your preset is representing, and make it descriptive so that when you look through your lists again, you'll know that that's what that was. I always save mine to my user presets, so that I know where they are, because I can always favorite it. So I like to keep mine set to user presets of where I save it. And then what this represents, all these boxes are, is all the different categories of adjustments you can make in the camera raw filter. But I like to start by checking none. And because I'm doing this specifically for color grading, what I like to do is only have the preset capture my basic settings that I used for color correction for this image, and the color grading that I created, so that I capture the settings that I used to get this look. And I did those settings in basic for the color correction and in the color grading panel for color grading. Now, the one other thing that I highly recommend that you have checked before you hit OK on this is come down to the advanced settings down here at the bottom and click this box on like I have that says support amount slider, because then when you get your preset to pop up, you'll get a slider that will let you control how intensely the preset is set. So this might look fine here, but if you put it in something else, it might look too much. Or even if you go to apply this again on this image, you might say, you know, I think I got a little nuts on that. So then if you have that amount slider, you can pull it down, you can dial it back and make it a lot more subtle than it is and how it appears. So I'm not going to hit OK because I already have done a preset similar to this and I don't want to end up with duplicates. So I'm going to cancel. But what you would do is if you want to save your preset, you hit OK. And if you've set it to go to your user presets, then when you hit this preset button here to expand it, it will appear in your user presets. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. Now that I've finished my color grading, I'm going to hit OK to exit the camera raw filter and go back to the Photoshop interface. There we go. So we're back into the regular interface, and we've got our newly color graded image on this layer. And if I turn off that layer, you see my original image is in the background, and I don't know, I think it's pretty good going from a bright daylight sort of, hey, hi, who are you? to, oh my God, who are you? I'm calling 911. So anyway, you can use this color grading to be as aggressive or as subtle as you want. So why don't I show you another demo? So we've gone from bright to dark. Why don't we do kind of an inversey kind of a demo here and go from an image that's more on the cool tone. So that started more warm and I brought it cool and blue. This is definitely, you know, sort of a bleak, dreary, hazy, cool cityscape. And I want to give credit where credit is due. This is a stock photo by Lance Anderson, and I got it from Unsplash, which is a stock site. So thank you, Lance. for loaning me your picture for the demo. And I want to try to take Lance's dreary cityscape that's a little on the hazy side and make it towards a brighter, happier, color analogous in the warm colors kind of a range. So let me duplicate the layer so we can work on a duplicate layer. And as I said, what I want to do is make this have an analogous color scheme. So analogous means next to, sorry, gonna sneeze, each other on the color wheel. So I want this to be predominantly reds, oranges, and yellows when I get through color grading it. So I'm going to go through the same kind of steps I just went through on the previous demo, in the sense that I have my duplicated layer. Going to go up to the filter menu and come down to the camera raw filter, so we can get into camera raw to do both our color correction as a first step and our color grading as a second step. Okay, so we're going to start with the color correction in the basic panel again. So since I said I want to go warmer, and this is a cool image with the blues and the greens and whatever right now, I do want to warm up the temperature a little bit and go from the bluer tones it's set and skew it a little bit more yellow. Okay, so I just did a slight little bump with that. And ditto with the tint. So the greens are a cooler color, so I want to go towards the magentas, which get me towards a warmer shade. And I think I'll just try to stay in the same general range that I did the temperature, just keep them pretty much in line with each other. So I gave them both a bump towards the warmer sides of the temperature and the tint sliders for affecting the color correction on this to get me where I want to go. Next, I'm going to do the exposure. And I want to actually take the exposure down a little bit because there's so many blown highlights in these clouds. So let me see if I can just do a minimal there. Yeah, let's leave it right there. Just enough to get a little more definition in the clouds for this particular image. Now, because I want to go from this hazy, moody sort of scene to something brighter and cheerier and more definite, I want to add contrast. In the previous one, I was taking away the contrast to make it look sort of foggy and night and whatever. Here, I want to make it more crisp and contrasty. So I'm going to grab my contrast slider and pull it towards the right to add some contrast. And you can do what I'm doing. I sort of watch the slider and I watch the image and I sort of see when I get to something that looks like something that suits my taste, I stop or I noodle around in that area. Sometimes what I often do on sliders is I go past where it is and then I say, oops, too much, and then I back it off to there. Yeah, so I think that's good. So we've gotten some good definition. The buildings look less like they're in a misty night and more in a definite daytimey kind of lighting scheme in terms of the contrast of them. Okay, the highlights, again, I want to take the highlights down a little and get rid of some of all this cloudy, bright sky that I have here from this starting image. So highlights and shadows would be what I would typically do next. So I pretty much follow the flow of the basic panel here in terms of processing for color grading, but with the color correction as the first step. All right, let's take the highlights down a little bit. So yeah, that's giving me a little bit more definition. I'm going to go to 8. All right, I'll leave that there. And shadows, I actually want to open up some of the shadows because this looks sort of bleak and dark. Look at these shadows. So I don't want to go so much that it blows it out, but I want to go where we're getting some of the details in the shadows for this as part of the color and image correction. Oh, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, let's leave it there because then I'm seeing more in the trees. I'm seeing a little more definition of the foliage and the bushes there. Again, still a lot of whites, so maybe I will just take that down just a touch. Yeah, that's all right. Because I can't get rid of it completely. I mean, I'm not going to change the whites to something else, and particularly for the purposes of what I have here. So I'm just going to leave that like that. Maybe I'll just do a hit, just a light hit of the dehaze since it's a hazy image. There we go, just a 1. Be very careful with dehaze. Boy, that can go nuts fast on you. I typically wouldn't go up much over 5, but it depends on the look that you're going for. Okay, so now again, as I said, for night scenes, I would take the saturation out and try to make it look a little muddier. For this, I want vibrance and saturation, and I want it to look like more solid colors, more definite colors for a more daytimey, bright, happy scene. So I'm going to crank up this vibrance here first and see what that does. So watch the image and we'll see what's happening. So look at the grass is getting brighter. We're getting more little pretty flowers there. Some of this through here. The buildings are getting a little bit more color and personality in them. I'm going to stay around there. Okay, and then saturation. So normally, in most instances, but color grading is a little different, so the rule won't hold. If I crank up the vibrance, then I will pull down the saturation so that the colors don't get too funky and odd. But in situations like this, I'm working with color and I want the color to be more statementy, so I'm going to push the saturation up a little bit too, but not go crazy so that the colors get too distorted. All right, I'm going to leave that like right there. Okay, so I've finished my color and image correction, so now I'm ready to move on to the color grading. So we'll just slide down here, and as I already said, I'm not a fan of working with the 3 color wheels, so I'm going to go directly over here, and this time I think what I will do here is, I'll start with the shadows. I'll start with the shadows as I did before. So you click on that first circle, make sure it says shadows. And what I want to put into the shadows, so I said I was going to work with an analogous color scheme. I want to work with red, orange, and yellow. And to me, those seem like happier, warmer colors. So I'm trying to make this a happier, warmer scene. So in the shadows, I want to put some red. So I'm going to go for the shadows, I'm going to go to my hue slider, and I'm going to put a little bit of red, not crazy because I don't want it to look like it's on fire. Alright, so we popped up a little bit of the red in some of these shadows. It's just going to be a base, for like some of these buildings too, and give them a little bit more personality. But now I'm going to keep that subtle, but I'm going to push up the saturation. Let's see if we can make this look almost fall-ish. Not too much. Alright. Yeah, that's good. I'll leave it there. Okay. And then for the shadows, luminance, I want to keep it on the darkish side because again it's the shadows. And I'm giving a hint of red, so I don't want it screaming, ooh, look, there's red in here. That would look maybe like a horror movie. And then there's blood all over, and you wanted to give that impression. So let's just push it into the shadows so it's an impression of red but not yelling at you. I'm going to stay there. Okay. Alright, let's move on. So for me, I feel good with where that shadows are for that color grade. And as I said before, you don't need to adjust them all. If you don't want to for yours, just adjust. You could just do the shadows and the highlights. You could just do the shadows. Just pick and choose what's going to suit your image. You don't have to do all the different options that are available just because they exist. All right, I'm going to click on the next button for the midtones. And now I'm going to go to that next analogous color, which is orange. So since orange is next to red on the color wheel, Okay, I think we've, well, it might be a little far. Oops, my hue. Not helps if you click on the slider. Alright, so I'm going to leave that in that general range there. For the saturation for that, again, I want to sort of push it up. Go and do the same thing I sort of did with the reds. Oh, whoops, too much. Alright, yeah, like that there. And then for the luminance, again, I want to go a little darker. I don't want it to be wacky orange. Oh, that's kind of nice. Come up a little bit. Alright, I'm going to leave it right there. Okay, so I've got my mid-tones with the oranges, and now I'm going to go to this third highlights color wheel. And for the highlights, I want to go yellow because that's the next analogous color, so red, orange, yellow. And we want to have a big pop of yellow in here. So I'm watching the bushes and seeing when they get to be a nice, like it looks like a forsythia or something over there. Alright, I'll stay around there. Might be a little too green. Oops, I'm not clicking on the slider. So, here, I think it's going to be easier. I just want to come down like one thing. There we go, I typed in the 51. Alright, and then for the saturation, again, I want a lot of yellow in here, so I'm going to crank up the yellow. So look what it's doing to the sky, to the buildings. Okay. Yeah, and then I want this brighter. So we got that. And then we've pumped a lot of yellow into this scene, and I can see the yellow and the orange particularly, and then there's the hint of the red. So for the blending, again, I definitely want the colors to meld more or be a smoother transition between the colors. So I'm going to pull my blending slider to the right so there aren't kind of distinct color edges. Yeah, like that. And then with the balance, I definitely want to skew it towards the highlights and the brighter colors versus the reds, because we're going a little more cheerful with this, or at least a happier color than the cool, but we're going warmer, I guess is the way to say it, than cooler with this. Yeah, so this is warming it up. Okay, I guess I don't need to be this specific. You're not going to work with this image. Let's call this good. So same thing as with that other image. You can create a preset if you like that kind of look or whatever. I'm not going to bother to do that. I am just, and I'm not going to do a global color on this one. I am just going to hit OK for purposes of this demo. And you could have used that eye icon as I did before to check it while you're in the color grading before you left, but I'm not going to, I'll just do it here. So you can see we've gone, and by using color grading to make this from a very cool and misty to a warmer, sharper kind of an image. Now, I might be pushing my luck here for purposes of a demo that I'm trying to do as I on the fly here, but let me duplicate this layer. So I will call this the color grade, if I spelled it right, I hope. Yeah. And this I want to use and see what happens if we take this now, because you might want to do more with your image beyond just color grading it. So let's take this newly created landscape or cityscape scene and see what happens since we're in Photoshop. If we go over to Edit, the Edit menu up at the top left, and come down to Sky Replacement, and see if we can add a different sky on this and what impact it might have. Now that's clearly not a good sky for this. So let me look through my skies and see what I have here. Well, let's try this one, see what this looks like. Oh, I like that. If I do say so myself, I like that. Okay, so let's work with this sky because it kind of looks like it's, gotten a sunsetty look from the way that the building was color graded. So Shift Edge. What happens here? To move where the horizon line is falling is what I'm doing with this on this. Okay. And then I'm going to fade the edge a little bit. I usually leave it pretty close to the middle. I tend to like to, let's see if it, oh, that's actually not bad. Okay, so let's leave it up around there. And then the brightness, I think I'll just leave that at 0. Because I'm trying to warm this up, we want the temperature warmer, so I'm going to warm this so that the sky matches the scene. I want to have it be very warm. Yeah, that's kind of nice. It's casting a warmer light on things. Alright. And then scale. Well, maybe we can scale this up because there's a lot of blue still in that sky. Maybe I can see what happens if I get more of the emphasis on the pinks, because that'll go with the reds and the oranges. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. And the light is coming from there. Foreground lighting. So the foreground lighting means how this is going to impact whatever you put in the sky is going to impact the foreground. So let's leave that around there. And the edge lighting, I think, talks about, this is a new feature, relatively new feature, how the where it's meeting the sky. So you can just pull the sliders and see how it looks. And by the way, if the sky ever goes over the buildings, you can use this brush up here to paint it away, but this isn't, that's a different tutorial. But I'll just want to mention it in passing. Okay, and then the color adjustment, I definitely sort of want this to cast onto the foreground, so I'm going to pull that up, match it a little bit better. And I want to create new layers, so I'll just hit OK. And now we have our sky replacement group. So we've gone from our original image to the color grade. So we've gone from a cool to a warm. And then with the new sky, we've kind of changed the mood and the feeling of the original image. So just to show what color grading can do for you, and as I said, you can do it as subtly and as dramatically as what will help you achieve the purpose of your fine art photography. But I think color grading is just fabulous to add mood and impact to photos. What I showed you in this video today, as I said, was using the camera raw filter inside of Photoshop to do the color grading. There are other tools that I'll demonstrate in other videos at another time. And I'd say just enjoy it. And you can also do what I showed you in the very first instance of what different colors look like and what the symbolism for the colors. You can just overlay a single color over your image and it'll change the mood too. So have fun playing with color grading, and I look forward to you and seeing your images that you create in the future. Take care.